Hi and welcome to this lunchtime webinar on Community Energy Fund. My name is Ruth Mulvaney and I manage the fund here with Florence Newman at the Midlands Net Zero Hub. Some of you might remember the Rural Community Energy Fund based on the success of that, the Community Energy Fund has been opened up to all areas, including urban areas. So the whole of the Midlands is now, this funding is available to all community groups, charities, eligible groups. We have all the information and application forms available on the website. So if there's anything that we haven't covered today, or there's anything that we can't answer in the Q&A, so if you want to submit your questions as we go in the chat, that's absolutely fine. But we will address and try and answer anything later on that we can't answer today, because it's quite vast, the information, and a lot of the projects are done on a case by case, but the two major things to think about is it's community owned, so it has to be 50% community owned project, it has to be an eligible body like a charity, community interest company, a benefit society, a co-op. There's a list, and also we are using minimal financial assistance criteria because it's deemed as a subsidy. So you can't have, your group can't have had 315,000 over the last 3 years in other funding deemed as a subsidy. So the main reason the Community Energy Fund was set up was to get over the hurdles to large scale community-owned energy projects. So most people won't have, you know, the funds for a feasibility study sitting in a bank account. You know, parish council isn't going to necessarily have £40,000 sitting there ready to do a feasibility study, but they may own, you know, a parcel of land that could create and site technologies that could create energy for that community. And the Department for Energy and Net Zero identified in its former, it was Business and Energy Industrial Strategy, it was formerly known as BEIS, that it was a problem for community groups to fund feasibility studies. So that's why the Rural Community Energy Fund was set up. It was extremely successful. It opened a lot of doors to people. It created a lot of new community energy companies. And Bob Sherman will be talking to us a little bit later on about his journey through their charity that started off with a stage 1 application, and then they evolved into a community energy interest company as they went through the stage 2. So in a stage 1 feasibility, your group can apply for up to £40,000 for a feasibility study into, you know, sort of large scale energy generation. So thinking of types of projects that need planning permission. So not just not a kind of, you know, solar on a roof where you already know that, you know, that you can do that and that's going to work. What's different in the Community Energy Fund is we now have what's called Type B projects. So we're calling the technology projects Type A, which is what we did with the Rural Community Energy Fund. But these Type B projects, they are not technology, but they're energy efficiency advice projects. So advice targeting fuel poor households, or bulk buy schemes for renewable and low carbon energy retrofit programs. So the Type B is quite varied. So if you have a type B project, do come and speak to myself and Florence about your type B project. Again, it'll be on a case by case basis. And we will certainly, talk to you about your project and how we can get it before the board. So the applications, we have a round coming up in June that closes June the 4th, and then one in September and in November. All those dates are on our website. And the board, the deciding factor is the Midlands Hub board decide which applications can be funded. Now, we will do everything in our power to support groups with a good project through that process. And if your project goes before the board and they see maybe something that they would like changed, they're really good at, discussing how your project could be better, how you could resubmit. So it's always worth making an application. It's always worth getting in earlier so that there's time to resubmit should anything need to be changed. So that's the type A, type B projects. If you're a type A project, which is a technology, which is maybe, for example, looking at a piece of land with maybe a solar project on there with battery storage, then you would need to apply for a stage 2 after your stage 1 feasibility is complete. And that will get you through the next stage, but again, not pay for any capital costs, but all your plan and permission, your surveys, anything, your legal agreements, solicit, anything at all, bar the capital costs that's required to get you further along towards realising the project. And there's 100,000 available for stage 2. I'm going to hand over now to Bob Shervin from Harbury and in Warwickshire, and he is going to tell you about his experience.
Hello. I think I should start by telling you that this was an absolutely positive experience from beginning to end, not without its problems, but it was a positive process that we went through. And if you look at it this way, we got stage 1 and stage 2. So we had £140,000 of funding from RCEF, which unlocked over £1 million at the far end of the project when we got to this stage. There is a bit of a story to this, so it doesn't all happen just like that. There's quite a lot of work to be done. So I'm hoping that by telling you what we did, it might help you, even though the CEF is very slightly different to the RCEF in terms of criteria. So we weren't working to quite the same rules, but pretty nearly. And we owe a lot to the support and advice we had from Ruth and her boss, Michael. So you probably would need to know what the project was. The project is an EV charging station, electric vehicle charging station, part powered by renewables behind the village hall in the village of Harbury, where I live. It's a village of about 3,000 people. And it involved quite a few different facets, quite ambitious. We weren't talking here about 7 kilowatt charging points, which a number of village communities have put in. This is 50 kilowatt and 22 kilowatt charge points, so quite a high demand. There are issues with grid connections, obviously, as well as all the planning. One of the things we wanted to do was put up a small wind turbine, but more about that later. So it all starts with an idea. So I was the chair, and still am, of a charity called Harbury eWheels, which provides free transport to people in need using 2 electric cars. And we have something like 26 volunteers running that. So I was getting a bit fed up with having to apply to trust funds all the time. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we had some form of income coming in that we could give to Harbury eWheels and save me the trouble of all these blasted applications that I keep having to do. So that's where it started. I talked to a friend about it and he said, oh, I've got a much better idea. And between us, we came up with this rough idea, and then we asked Ruth, and she was very encouraging. And so from then on, we had to get on with it, because clearly we'd got the support from the Midlands Energy Hub. We had an idea and it was exciting. We wanted to do it. So the first thing that we did was to put together a competent team. And we needed a mix of skills. Because I'm not technical, I don't know anything about energy. I struggle to understand watts and volts and things like that, but I just know that a lot of this stuff works, and there are people that do know. So we needed technical people. We needed people who understood about tendering and evaluation of bids and things for when we actually got to that stage. We needed people who could fundraise, which turned out to be my job again. And we needed people with PR skills who could help us engage the community and get their support. And we had all of that very quickly. There were people who were really into this idea. And in most communities, those people do exist. You just got to find them. There are a lot of retired people like me who've got time on their hands and they don't want to be bored. And this is the kind of thing that can engage them and get them really excited. So we started work on the stage 1 bid, which was for a feasibility study. Absolutely essential. We, at the same time as starting to write the bid, started to engage more with the community to make sure they knew what we were up to, and that we weren't going to suddenly find demonstrations outside the village hall when we got to a later stage in the project, by which time we would have committed rather a lot of time and energy. But we also had to find, as part of the bid, we had to show that we'd got 3 consultants lined up to bid for the work. And we just could not find people who would do it. We struggled with this. I hope it's got better now. But we ended up with only 2 prepared to bid and 1 dropped out. So because the rules said we had to have 3, we went back to the Midlands Energy Hub, who said, yeah, that's fine. If you've got 1, let's go with that, because otherwise it was never going to happen. Fortunately, the ones that we chose were absolutely brilliant and produced a phenomenal feasibility study, which has been shared with lots of people. And that's what you've got to remember, that this feasibility study isn't just for you. There will be other people who can learn from it. And we've had many people tell us what a good report it was. There's about 150 pages in it. So it was quite comprehensive. And it told us everything we needed to know about whether this would work, how it would work, and so on. Communication to the village, we used everything we could think of that was appropriate. So Facebook, it may not be young people's choice of social media these days, but it is very much how we engage with people in the village, because there are 2 Facebook groups with thousands of people in, and they are completely village focused. So if you want to get a message out to people, you put it in there. So we used Facebook. We used our local parish magazine that goes out to virtually all the houses in the village. Doesn't mean they read it, but they get it, whether they want it or not. Lots of word of mouth. Of course, the village is an ideal community for being able to communicate with people, because you stop and chat to them in the street all the time. So it became a topic of conversation, whether they wanted to hear it or not. And we also created a web page. Harbury eWheels came out of another organisation I started called Harbury Energy Initiative, which had at this stage a website which featured not only Harbury Energy Initiative, which is an informal community group, but also Harbury eWheels. And so we stuck another page on there, which was the project. So that started to get people to understand what we're trying to do. We also did a survey, an online survey, quite a simple one, and that got quite a good response, actually. I know that I am told that online surveys can't expect to get very high interest and return, but we got about 15%, which I'm told is pretty good. Actually, it was nearer 20%. At this point, obviously, we're applying for funds. We needed a name for the project. So although the organisation that was applying was the charity Harbury eWheels, we decided that we need a project name, so we called it Harbury Future Energy. That is now a community interest company, but it wasn't at the time. It was just the name of the project. And going through the feasibility study process with the consultants gave us a much clearer idea of what we were doing, because you can start with a great idea, but it's got to have some meat on it. And actually, these projects are quite complicated, so they've really you've got to get down to the nitty gritty. And all of that has to go into the bid. You've got to be quite sure what you're doing. So we submitted that in September 2019 for stage 1 funding. Unfortunately, by the way, the consultants we got for the feasibility study, who are called Greenwatt, he's retired now, so you can't use them. They don't exist. We were lucky in that we got a stage 1 grant, and I think one of the things that surprised me was how quickly that was turned around, because within a few months of applying, we knew that we had got £40,000 worth of funding. We decided also that it was important not just to engage our community, but to engage local authorities and people of importance and influence who could support what we were doing. So we got letters of support from our MP, who took it to Chris Skidmore, is he? Anyway, who was at the time the Secretary of State for Energy. And he sent a letter as well. So the county council, the district council, the parish council all sent us letters of support, which no doubt helped our bid a lot. We continued to engage community. So the village has a carnival every year, so we exhibited at that. The village also has now a local market, which at the time was kind of moving around different venues, and one of them was at the school, which was actually quite a good place. We were outside at the school. Our MP came along. We had a stand at it, so that enabled us to broaden out the survey. So we had a bigger group then of people responding to the survey, and what we found was hugely positive response from the village. Obviously, not everybody thought it was a great idea. You'll be very lucky if you get that kind of response, but most people were. So then the feasibility study was submitted, and it was accepted, and we were invited to apply to stage 2 quite soon after submitting. So again, we were into another application, and it is quite, it's not a simple process. You've really got to have everything together before you can submit it. So once again, we needed to find consultants, because we're into a different phase. So it's all about getting business ready. And as Ruth told you, there's no capital funding, but all the really important things that make you fundable as a project are funded. So things like planning and all the surveys that need to be done, and all the planning that needs to be done, that is all covered by your £100,000. You may not need all of it. I think we got 98,000 in the end, which was pretty nearly 100,000. But once again, we could not find a consultant who would take on this work. There were people that knew about EVs. There were people that knew about renewables, but we couldn't find anybody as consultants who would put the two together, because that was the project. It wasn't 2 projects, it was 1. Fortunately, there was one consultancy called Allen Construction Consultancy who were very keen to take on the work. And as it happened, one of the directors of that company lives in Harbury. So he was on hand. they operate in a very different way. We had to get used to a different way of working. Greenwatt used to have very regular sessions with us, talking things through. Allen Construction Consultancy did masses amount of work, which was kind of off grid for us. We didn't quite always know what was going on. But then when they did have a meeting, we were bombarded with information, especially costings, which of course become crucial at this point because you want to know what you're in for. So it becomes much more technical at this point, and there's a lot of process involved. So your feasibility study has revised what you want to do. So you've got lots more knowledge, and the feasibility study should give you even greater belief in what you're doing, because you will know that the feasibility study has told you it can be done, and this is how it can be done, and this is what it will deliver for you. There was always a bit of a risk with this project, which still exists really, in that nobody's done it before. So, and that's one of the great things about Community Energy Fund, is that it supports innovation and new ideas and creative thinking, which is quite hard to fund from elsewhere. In some ways, stage 2 is easier because a lot of the information you've already got together for stage 1. So it's almost a cut and paste for some of the things like who are the people involved in your project and what are their qualifications and who's actually the project manager, etc., etc. You've done all that before. So we've now got to the point where we know that the project is about having 4 22 kilowatt fast chargers and 1 50 kilowatt rapid charger, that we're going to have 12.5 kilowatts of PV, and we hope, all things being well, an 8 kilowatt wind turbine. But it's not a standard horizontal axis wind turbine, it's a vertical axis wind turbine. In other words, it's a tower with the blades that operate going around like that rather than going around like that. We have we would have an 80 kilowatt energy store, battery store, which would duplicate as a kind of pop-up cafe, because we didn't need all the space in it, so that when the junior football team were playing a match at home, you know, they could maybe use it to serve teas and coffees and things. So we had to do, in order to achieve all this, we'd got to do financial projections, which of course kept changing because costs at that point were going up every month almost. We had various legal agreements to get into. One of the issues we had, which we hadn't realised at the beginning, was that the parish council had put the land that we're going to use into something called Fields in Trust. So they had a deed on that, so we had to get permission from them, which we did. Parish council gave us unanimous support amongst the councillors. The village hall agreed to have this PV on the roof, so all of that was done. Then, of course, to get planning, there's some fairly hefty fees involved in planning, not least all the surveys you have to do, which are archaeological, they're ecological, they're about soil, they're about wildlife, they're about anything you can think of, you've got to have a survey for, otherwise you won't get planning consent. We had to get into risk assessments, we had to set timelines, but all of this, it doesn't all happen at once. It takes time, and different people work on this. And this is where our consultants were so good, because this is what they do. It's what they do all the time. So they knew exactly how to do all this, which was enormously helpful. We applied for, we sent in our application in about October 2020. And by November, we knew that we had got 98,000. So we were then in business. And by May of 2022, so it took a couple of years. I mean, I'm kind of having to dredge up memories from way back because we seem to have been doing this for years. But anyway, by May 22, we'd got all the surveys in place and consents from Fields in Trust and so on. We'd got the planning granted, which we got at the 31st of May 2022. The National Grid had given us some advice that yes, we could put energy into the grid, and we could also take the energy we needed out of the grid. So that gave us more confidence. We were business ready, and we would never ever have been able to get to that stage without RCF funding. It would have just remained a good idea, which I wish we had done. So now we had to find a way to pay for it. So we are now getting to the point where we are beyond RCF funding. And this was a real headache because our project by this stage was now racking up something like £400,000 worth of project funding needed. During this process, we had an approach from the county council because they knew about a fund that the government was going to release called LEVI, the Low Emission Vehicles Infrastructure Fund. But that was only available to county councils. The first stage of which was a pilot stage with quite limited funding, so not many projects were going to get it. And Warwickshire County Council wanted to apply, but they didn't have a project. Funnily enough, we did. Not only that, we'd done all the work for them, and they couldn't believe that they had got a project ready-made for them. So they asked if they could work with us. But if they were going to work with us for this fund, they were going to need to make the project twice as big. So we've ended up with a £1.1 million project backed by the county. We even wrote the bid for them to the levy fund. So they didn't have to do a lot at this stage. So it's a much bigger project now. The costs have gone up a lot. Because we're working with the county council, they're much slower. I mean, we just are used to having an idea, turning it into action and just doing it. It doesn't work like that when you're working with local authorities. One of the downsides of all of this was that they discovered, when we had been through probably a year or so talking to them, that we couldn't own any of this. But it did mean that we were going to get our EV charging station and our solar panels. What we didn't know, and we still don't know, is whether we were going to get a wind turbine, because the Energy Savings Trust, who are managing the funding of the levy fund, said you have to prove to us that it's going to be worth it. So we're now having to look at that. But the other thing about it was, although it was a much bigger bid, it did enable the county council to apply for even more funding. So that they got this pilot funding. First of all, they were told they couldn't have it. There wasn't enough money. And then all of a sudden we were told, yes, you've got the money. There's more money being made available by the government. You're in. So we got very excited at this point. It unlocked some more money for them in that they were able to bring in extra people. So we now have got to the stage now where we have a dedicated member of staff from the county who is there to make sure this whole project happens. There are complications in it that I haven't brought up because you don't need to know really, but the funding they got excluded some of the things that we wanted to do. So the parish council needed us to extend the car park because we were pinching car park places for EVs. So we then went and got some funding for that. So that was another something like £75,000 of funding we had to get, which some of which came from a local solar farm. So if you've got anything like that happening around your way, they're usually providing some community funding to communities affected by their work. And we got some money from the Levelling Up Fund, which surprised me a bit because I didn't think it was levelling up, but apparently it was. So every aspect of this is now funded. And we are into the stage now where we have done the car park extensions, so the project is live, but not launched. We are now a community interest company because the county insisted we had to be, and we wanted to be anyway. And the project will happen. We will have some renewables. In fact, we may have more PV and no turbine. I'm not sure. And it's possible that we may receive some community funding because the county council are deeply embarrassed by what's happened. It was always understood, as we were talking, that we would have some ownership and therefore we would have an income stream. But they are looking to see if there's some way of profit sharing with us, because one of the key things that installers will have to do is to profit share with the county. So a certain small percentage of their income has to go to the county. So the one thing that we don't know is, will it be commercially viable? And we won't know that until we start using it. But the fact is, it's there, it's done, and we could never have done it without RCF funding.
Thanks, Bob. That's brilliant. It was such a learning curve, and the projects change so much. I think that's the takeaway, and evolve throughout the process. You know, there's so much change because the climate we're in it changes any, where society is heading. So much change since 2019, and funding pots do become available as well to we've fed back to the government about how important maybe a stage 3 would be to fund the projects, the capital costs, particularly because a lot of private business are getting involved now because they see how strong community energy can be in the marketplace, in the energy generation marketplace. So thank you so much for that, Bob. It's great insight. Florence, over to you. Have you got some questions?
Yes, so we've got one question. So my CIC is considering starting an energy co-op based in urban area of Birmingham. So this is based on larger and smaller prosumers. So we need about 10,000 to start. Is that something that would be eligible?
Yeah, well, certainly get in touch and we'll have a chat about that, and see exactly what you need that money for. You don't have to apply for the whole amount. So we had some really good smaller scale projects towards the end of the Rural Community Energy Fund that were such good value for money, that we funded them, because obviously there's a pot of money, and want it all to go to good value projects, and they're not always very expensive. It depends what that is, but on the scale is supposed to be that larger scale, but we will, do talk to us is what I'm saying. Any group that's got an idea, do talk to us.
So there are no other questions at the moment. Have you touched on Type B projects, Ruth?
Yes, I did mention the Type B. Again, I'd encourage any group to talk to us about that. So it's very useful if you get in touch with us, if you're interested in making an application, to discuss the application beforehand, and we will support you through that. We'll even take a look at a draft application. That's always very helpful, because the board, they come from all different backgrounds. Some are very technically minded, others are very community minded, but the community benefit is always a real strong driver of the project. They are interested in that community benefit, however that may present itself. And also the applications are scored. So Bob mentioned the 3 quotes that you need. We're in the process of setting up a sort of a consultant, a database, so that you will be able to access online and put in your requirements, and hopefully it'll match you to a consultant. Could be anywhere in the country, because this resource will be available to the other hubs as well and other communities around England. And because it was difficult for people to get 3 quotes, not so much now, because there are you know, it's well known, the funding, and people are, you know, consultants are keen to get involved. But it's important to have those 3 quotes. A type B project won't be necessarily the same, because it's not a feasibility in the same way that the type A technology projects are. So again, you know, come and speak to us before you make your application. And you know, the board are always interested in people using consultants local to the projects. I always found that if they were local, they were more invested, and they went above and beyond what a consultant should do in terms of supporting the project. We do have a list of consultants. Obviously, we can't recommend anyone, but that's just a handy list if people need that. But as I say, hopefully, certainly by this summer, we will have this other resource available for people to get quotes.
So we've just had a question from Steve about what projects have received funding and how many applications were made. So Catherine has just put in our chat the successful applicants from the first year of SEF. And then the next question, Ruth, I presume the Type B funds also cannot cover any capital costs of retrofitting homes?
No capital costs at all for this funding.
That's fine. Yeah, so obviously, yeah, the criteria is quite narrow, so it won't suit some needs. Hopefully we can share in a second some other options for capital funding. So I shall just one more question. We're an ethical landlord and want to make houses more energy efficient. Is this something that could be funded? So
it depends on what capacity. We can't,
yeah.
Again, we can't do the works, but it depends how many props. So if for example, I'm just thinking off the top of my head now, you own X amount of properties and you wanted to do maybe a pilot, a case study on, you know, 10, 12 or 13 properties in a certain area, that then you maybe would do aim to do a renewable energy retrofit program on. So it would come under Type B, and how you would go about that, you know, could be funded. How do you, so looking at those, like we've had, say like a street in a city where there's a feasibility done for the whole street, say of terraced houses, how to make them, you know, energy efficient. So you could work it, I suppose, on that basis, that you're looking at X number of properties, and how you would retrofit them, and then a program of works for the future on which do you do first. So again, if you approach us and we can have a conversation about it. We haven't had anything like that, so we're willing to talk about it.
Okay, so if I just share some other funding options now. The Centre for Sustainability is a great website that you can go on. It's got lots of different options for funding. It has a comprehensive list that they update as well. So definitely check that one out for your first basis. Landfill Communities Fund, that one is for anybody that's within 10 miles for landfill. They provide capital funding for energy projects. The criteria and eligibility is on there too. So the VCSE energy efficiency scheme is a really interesting one. It's for village halls, it's for community buildings, so you can get your first energy efficiency measure report through. So that can be a great starting point for people to see how to become more efficient. And then I think the second round of funding includes capital costs to actually put that retrofit measures in. Christian churches, there's quite a few out there that they have funding pots for. The other faith groups obviously will have funding, however they're not well known at the moment, so it's obviously a big area that we'd love to look into, how we get you know, more funding and groups in that area to come out. Severn Trent funding, they love to fund anything hydropower. I mean, there's some great projects out there that could be funded by this. And East Midlands Airport Community Fund, they've got a lot of money that they want to spend. That fits in quite a lot of the Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, Leicester areas. So it's worth having a look there. And then obviously everything that you've said today in terms of, you know, the narrow criteria, the lack of capital funds, the government want to hear about that. So if you did want feedback, there's a link down here to say how they could maximise this funding for the potential of the community energy projects. And so, yeah, that list isn't comprehensive, and I do think that anybody that has any kind of idea, get in touch with us from our email address at the bottom of that, and we can help steer you to an officer that's dedicated to your region. They will have lots of links into other energy projects in your region. There'll be lots of heat district potential, and it's great that we can map these kind of projects up. So don't be disheartened if this funding part doesn't really fit your criteria. There'll definitely be other options out there. Shall I hand back to you, Ruth, or should we wrap that up for today? Oh, actually, two more. Yeah, this page is available to download. I will send that out with the recording afterwards. And we have another question. We're involved in transport-based net zero projects. Are these eligible? I'm going to say absolutely.
Yeah, I don't see why not. Yeah, again, have a conversation with us. Well, that's great. Thanks, Florence. Thanks for all of that. And just to note, if you had funding under the Rural Community Energy Fund scheme, you are eligible if it's in a new project under the Community Energy Fund, or another new project, or if it was an extension on the existing project, it would be up to the full amount. But if it's a new project, entirely new, you can apply as if you were applying just for the first time. So thanks for joining us today. And thanks especially to Bob, because I think it's more important to hear somebody's real experience. And I think that's really helpful. And I please encourage you to get in touch with us. We'll meet you on Teams, or, you know, we can try and come and visit if it's to see a site. We can arrange to do that. We'll support you through your application. You know, the community energy sector is going to, you know, contribute massively to, you know, on our road to net zero. So thanks a lot.